Welcome to the Topic of the Month with Kim Wardlow, an AINC original podcast. It's not easy being blind or going through vision loss, but we'll help you navigate these waters. Press on. Push forward. You've got this.
Hello and welcome to the Topic of the Month, podcast brought to you by the Audio Information Network of Colorado. I'm Kim Wardlow, the Director of AINC and your host for this podcast. This month, we are discussing transportation. And I'm really excited to talk with our guest today, who will be Teague Kirkpatrick, because we are going to talk about how and why transit is evolving. And I think that's something that so many folks will be interested in. I know we've talked about issues with transportation, especially for those in the blind and visually impaired community, those with guide dogs. But today we'll talk about how maybe some things are evolving and changing. So when we come back, I will be joined by Teague.
This is Topic of the Month with Kim Wardlow. If you enjoy what you hear, please visit AIN Colorado for more shows, news, and articles read by our amazing staff and volunteers. If you have a question for Kim or would like to recommend a guest for future shows, please visit aincolorado.org/podcast-guest. Thanks for listening and enjoy.
Hello, Teague. Thank you for joining me today for our Topic of the Month podcast.
Hello, Kim. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is very exciting. Thank you.
Well, I always like to just start off with a couple questions just so people might get to know you a little bit better. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, or if you have some interesting hobby or skill that people might not typically know about that you're willing to share, that would be great. Or just where you're from, those general kinds of things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Nothing too exciting. I'm a family man. I've got a beautiful wife. I got two beautiful kids. I've got two little dogs. I actually got a little puppy that's been kept me busy for the past while. Other than that, I live in Westminster, Colorado, and I just do a lot of Colorado stuff. Do a lot of hiking, a lot of camping, spend a lot of time snowboarding, or as much time as I can, snowboarding with my son, and just like to get out and enjoy beautiful Colorado.
Oh, thanks. Well, kids always will keep you busy, so I'm sure you are not lacking in things to do with your family and your dogs. So. That's always fun. And we're neighbors. I live in Westminster as well.
Oh, okay. Great. Fantastic.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in transportation? Has this always been part of your career, or has this been something that you've started to do later on?
I guess maybe kind of middle age. I grew up in a very kind of rural environment, and just wasn't really around much transit or transportation at all, really. I actually first got into technology and started working in technology. I gravitated towards technology just because I found it to be, fascinating industry, a lot of change, a lot of innovation, solving problems and addressing challenges. And so my technology career actually got me into transportation. Ended up working at a company that did that built, deployed, and supported technology specifically for transportation providers. I was with that company for about 12 years, and worked with transportation providers all across the United States, Canada, Australia. And actually spent a lot of time working with transportation providers here in Colorado. I think at one point, about 14 different transit agencies were using our technology stack to provide transportation. No, I didn't come into this industry with some kind of passion for transportation. But and this is very common within the transportation industry, and specifically, there is kind of a difference between transportation and transit. Transit really is about moving people. And so that's what I got into, was transit. And it really does become a real passion. Specifically, what I spent a lot of time doing was working with transportation providers that were focused on using technologies to enhance their paratransit services. And there's a lot of people out there that have no idea what paratransit is. I had no idea when I first got into the transit industry. But paratransit really is a service that is designed for the elderly and the disabled and the ADA community, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Kind of getting into that paratransit, all of a sudden you start working with these transportation providers that are focused on paratransit, and these are just such passionate people. Like, they are out there to help people, and they are helping the most vulnerable of our population and of our community, and it's just fantastic to see. And then in doing so, I become friends with these individuals that really get ingrained into their operations, and so next thing you know, I'm riding paratransit via buses around the community, again, troubleshooting our technology and make sure it's working right. But in the process, I'm getting to know the ADA community. And so, in doing that, there's really no way you can be part of that kind of story and not just, really become passionate about it, because you can really see how transit, and specifically how paratransit, is changing the lives of the people in your community. It's very exciting to be a part of.
Yeah. When we do tend to be a very car-focused culture out here in the West with less public transportation. So transit is so important for people that driving isn't an option. And we have seen that change over the years and things being added. So I'm curious, since you came from the technology background, what do you see happening and evolving in terms of technology and transit?
Yeah, it's a great question. It goes back a ways, and so transit's been happening. People have been providing transit since kind of the beginning of communities, right, through river networks and different ways that we've handled transit. Transit really started kind of getting big. When transit started getting big and started using technology, that technology was really utilized. The way I would term it would be operations centric, meaning that transportation providers are using technologies to track their vehicles and better schedule their trips and better make changes on the fly for dispatching and better report on their operations. And so the technology really was kind of focused on the organization and how they could be more efficient, more efficiently utilize their funds to provide more trips with the funding they had. And so that's kind of where kind of technology really got in, kind of, again, operations or agency centric. But
not being really utilized by the riders.
Yes, exactly. And so that kind of gets us, into kind of 2010-ish. It seems like transit really started to then gravitate towards technology and how they could make that technology much more rider-centric. And a big piece of that was transit agencies were trying to move from only providing rides to people that were transit-dependent to what they call choice riders, people that may not need to use the service, but might use it if it was fit right and it felt right. And so a lot of those technologies really started being built from a rider's perspective. And those are things like, outbound phone call notifications that would provide updates on the service. That might be web portals where people could book their trips, smartphone apps where people could request trips and see when the vehicle's coming, and automated payments, so electronic payments. The transit industry has been super slow to adopt automated payments, even though like every other industry has. And so we saw that really kind of start picking up in the early 2010s and start deploying those technologies. And that's when things started getting very interesting. They started getting really exciting. And then, really was kind of around that time, 2015 or so, when, Uber came out and really did change transit in many ways. And what Uber did to transit was to say, hey, we can make mobility, moving people from point A to point B, super convenient. And that's exactly what Uber did. And some people worried Uber might take over transit. Transit was concerned about that. Ultimately, what Uber did was just prove the point that transit could be more real time, more spontaneous, much more automated from payment perspective. And, a lot of paratransit, you had to book your trip, 24 hours in advance.
Mm-hmm.
You had to pay with a token. It wasn't quite as user-friendly. It wasn't quite as on demand. And I think with Uber, other things kind of going on in the kind of in the world, everything started becoming on demand, right? If you want to listen to music, you can listen to whatever you want, whenever you want it. Same with videos and movies and Amazon Prime. And so kind of as a community, for better or for worse, just started expecting things when we needed it and when we wanted it on demand. And so that kind of on demand started flowing over into transit. And a lot of transit providers, both public transit and paratransit, said, hey, we might be able to do this. And if we use technology correctly, we might be able to do this efficiently. And we might be able to not only provide a better service for our riders, but we might be able to attract riders and bring more riders into transit. And bringing more people into transit has all kinds of benefits, right? That benefits the environment, that benefits our infrastructure. There's just, there's countless positive benefits that come from more people using public transit. And so technology really has bolstered that. And so that kind of movement, I think, in the late, 2017, 2018, 2019, that movement toward a more on-demand service model really was picking up steam. And so then, obviously, in 2020, the pandemic, I think, really had a massive effect on transit in a couple of different ways. One is that lots of people stopped using public transit, obviously. Mm-hmm. And whether or not we'll ever get to pre-pandemic ridership levels, that remains to be seen. We're still not there yet, although we're inching closer and closer. Mm-hmm. But I think what that pandemic really did do was that it got a lot of communities to kind of look internally at their community and see how many see all the mobility gaps within their community. It really shone a light on the disenfranchised. And I think a lot of communities said, hey, we could do better than this. It is time, like us as a transit industry, do better. And a big piece of that was filling in the mobility gaps that people find within their communities. Fixed route service can move a lot of people at a time, but leaves a lot of gaps out within the community. The paratransit service, again, it's focused on the ADA community. There's kind of above and beyond paratransit services. But again, everyone realized, hey, there are gaps, and how can we fill those gaps? And so a lot of people started looking towards kind of an on-demand Uber-esque type of solution that was be specifically designed to provide innovative approaches to filling those mobility gaps. And so kind of through that pandemic, as we kind of come out of that pandemic, more and more transportation agencies are saying, hey, things have changed. Let's reimagine how we're doing things. In fact, Denver RTD just went through this process. They called it Reimagine RTD. And that's super common across the entire United States. And most urban areas have had some kind of reimagining or rethinking. And, they're redrawing lines. They're trying to maximize what they're doing. But every one of those reimaginations tends to involve some type of on-demand transit. And that on-demand transit really requires technology to make that happen. Smartphone apps and algorithms for efficient routing. But that, I think, has really made transit evolve. And so, now instead of just fixed route and paratransit services, a lot of people are kind of creating kind of a third leg of that stool to have kind of on-demand services that commingles with all those services. We can feed more people into the fixed route. We can start commingling on-demand general public and paratransit to try to utilize more resources or utilize the same or diminishing resources to provide more rides. And again, the reason that's all been able to happen is kind of twofold. One is transit agencies are seeing that this is needed to fill those mobility gaps. The other side is a lot of transit technology firms are saying, hey, we're getting the technology figured out where we can actually do this and do it in an efficient and effective manner. So again, I think it's really exciting to kind of see where transit kind of has gone, but now as we look forward to see where it's going, a lot of people call it like mobility for all or mobility on demand. But that's it's a big piece that people are trying to incorporate into their transit overall transit networks. Again, with the whole purpose of providing more rides with the same amount of resources.
Do you think the transit companies and the technology companies are considering accessibility at a greater level as they're progressing and creating these new apps and things? Certainly for the folks we serve that have vision loss, some things work really well and have accessibility built in. But if it's not, technology sometimes can be very unfriendly?
Yes, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. And the answer is undoubtedly yes. And so from accessibility perspective, keep in mind, it's funny, it really wasn't that long ago. I think it was like the 1970s that there was like the Rehabilitation Act that kind of started forcing these paratransit fleets to be deployed in transit, which is completely focused on accessibility for individuals. Then the 1990 American Disabilities Act took that a step further. And actually, I think it was like the late 1990s, the FTA began to really mandate kind of the full compliance of those ADA requirements. So that ADA service, again, has been built from the beginning to address accessibility issues. I kind of talked about with the pandemic, a lot of people are really recognizing the need for much more accessible services, and it's accessibility and equity. And so when I talk about, I mentioned the reimagination, people kind of looking at reimagining how transit could look, hands down, every single one is rolling out a lot of their on-demand services specifically to address accessibility and equity within their communities. I mean, that's a big piece. People are looking at barriers to mobility can be a big barrier to life. It can be a barrier to employment, a barrier to health, a barrier to education. And so I do believe that accessibility and equity is being taken very seriously. I mean, I know from kind of my perspective, from a technology perspective, most technologies, at least the leading transit technology firms, are very informed with the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. It's called WCAG, which is like a set of standards developed specifically to ensure that any kind of web content is accessible to people with disabilities. And so compliance with that WCAG, that means, that any website or app to be designed and developed with the needs of all users in mind, including those with disabilities such as visual, audio, and motor impairments. Those individuals tend to gravitate towards technology, right? In very many cases, it might be easier to utilize a web portal or a smartphone app than to call in and book a trip. That community does tend to gravitate towards technology, that WCAG compliance, it's cool stuff. It involves making sure that, any web or app content is, I think it's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And so that it's easy to see, hear, and navigate, and that should be designed in a way to be consistent for all users. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think both the services, the transit providers, and all the technology vendors are very keen on this and are ensuring that they meet all these standards.
Well, that's great. I know, as you said, if you have a job, but you need to take transit to get there and the schedules just don't match up with the hours that you need to be at work, that can be detrimental to your livelihood. If it impacts your job, impacts going to school. So it's great to hear that they're thinking about being accessible, and it sounds like more on demand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just it. If you're, it's difficult. If you need to use a fixed route bus system to get to school or to work every day, for some people that works out well. Typically, if you're really lucky, that works out really well. But I think more often than not, it's going to take a couple transfers. It's going to take some time. You're going to be stuck outside in the snow or stuck outside in 98-degree weather. And it makes things difficult. It makes things a lot harder. Sometimes it just simply doesn't work. A lot of transportation providers, there's a lot of like rigid lines drawn around geography. And so if you work in the county over or the next city, sometimes it's very difficult to be able to do that, especially if you're trying to utilize paratransit. Mm-hmm. And so the on-demand really does help reduce that trip time. It helps improve the rider experience. And we're getting very, very creative. A big piece that's kind of the most difficult challenge in transit is what people call the first and last mile. And so, I live in Westminster. Yeah, of course, there's a commuter route that runs downtown, but the parking lot is actually not very far from my house. I can almost see it. But for a wheelchair to be able to get there, it's nearly impossible. It's very, very difficult. And so just that first mile over to the commuter route, being able to utilize some kind of on-demand solution to be able to just get me over there, and then I can utilize the existing network that is already there. I can utilize that if I could just access it. And so a lot of the on-demand services are doing that. And then again, the technology really helps. To be able to say, I'm going from my place to downtown, and it tells me, click this button, book an on-demand ride over to the parking ride, and then get on this bus going southbound at this time. And then you can take it one step further and be able to make one payment for that first mile, last mile, all my trips, one payment, make it nice and easy. So yeah, I think it is becoming more on-demand. It's becoming much more rider-friendly. And really the big goal is to have a much more integrated transit network to allow people to access, to be able to just access their lives.
Yeah, I know one of my coworkers is in that exact situation. He can literally see a park and ride from his house, and it's fine if he wants to go downtown, but to get to our offices in Boulder, the fastest route isn't, to go to Sheridan or to a street that has a park and ride for Highway 36 to come to Boulder. He actually was told the fastest way is to go to the park and ride the bus to Union Station downtown, and then from there come back out to Boulder, which is kind of crazy. And so he tends to have other more on-demand options. But then there's the factor of cost as well. Do you see any of that changing as there's more call for on-demand services, that there will be any way to keep those costs down?
Well, yeah, fantastic question. You're absolutely right. I mean, cost is, cost is a major barrier to mobility, right? I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, if transit agency could have, 50 on-demand vehicles running around Westminster, and it was zero fare, that'd be fantastic, right? But that, someone's got to pay for that. So absolutely. And, on-demand, some people make that argument to say, hey, on-demand can't be cost effective. You can't just be providing taxi rides for everyone and think that's going to work. That said, there's a lot being done to be able to provide better transportation at a reduced cost, or at least the same cost. So, I kind of mentioned kind of the on-demand. As that grows, a lot of agencies and cities are looking at underutilized fixed routes. And so you do see fixed routes that serve a very key purpose, the reason they're there, but they're not used very much. There's not many people riding those vehicles. And so that's kind of an idea, is to say, hey, let's just, that vehicle's running, 24/7, or, maybe a couple headways. It's a big bus. It's putting out pollutants. It's expensive to maintain. Maybe instead of that bus, we could have one or two fuel efficient vehicles running around providing the same amount of trips, maybe more trips at a reduced cost than a large bus. Other opportunities to be able to reduce cost. So another very common use case for on-demand transit would be low density areas. And so again, in low density areas, maybe it's communities that are just being built and still don't have the infrastructure or the density to make sense for a fixed route service. Then we can operate on-demand services in those cases. Other kind of concepts are being utilized across the U.S. One is utilizing TNCs as part of the overall transportation ecosystem. There's TNCs are able to complement the existing transit network to be able to provide rides at a much lower cost, both to the agency and or the individuals. RTD, in fact, has a program with, I think, with Uber, and I think maybe Lyft as well. But it's a subsidy program that allows eligible ADA riders to be able to book trips through Uber, and it's subsidized, not fully, but it's subsidized in a way. And so that's being utilized. Another model that I see a lot of on-demand approaches try to utilize kind of a variable supply model. And so in working with local taxi providers or local private transportation networks, transit agencies are able to kind of match their supply with the demand, meaning that instead of the transit agency having 50 vehicles because they need 50 vehicles at 8 in the morning at 5 p.m. at night, The rest of the day, they only need like 30. So the kind of idea is only have 30 vehicles, then kind of utilize kind of this variable supply. So you only use in vehicles when you need it. So, and, again, that's the vehicle, that's the gas, that's the driver, that's the wage. That's there's a lot that goes into that. So all that said, yes, on-demand service sometimes can be more expensive, but more often than not, we're finding ways to provide it in a way that, again, we're doing what we're really trying to do, which is to provide more rides with existing resources.
Mm-hmm. You touched on geographic limitations. Do you see any of that changing? And I realize part of that is due to funding and funding sources. And if you're funded by a specific county or entity that covers a specific geography, you may not be able to take somebody over a county line. Do you see any progress in that area of where things are shared, or if you have a pass for, one system, but you need to go over into the next county, that you might have a pass that would cover, the transit in both counties, something like that?
Yes. So absolutely that, well, I say geographical lines, it's more, the lines we draw as people on maps, right? That really right. Pose the problems. And you're absolutely right. It's the funding sources that are tied to those trips and the trips they're allowed to provide. Has always been a problem. People are absolutely or finding creative ways to get around that. And there's lots of, we see it all the time. A lot of people call it kind of mobility management. Another term would be regional coordination. And what it takes is, innovative and daring mobility, mobility stakeholders to be able to make that happen. And one agency I'll mention by name is Via Mobility up in Boulder, Colorado. And they're rock stars about this. I've worked with them for over a decade, and they've been able to do this to be able to provide, individuals in Broomfield, which maybe that's out of their jurisdiction, that need to get to Boulder County after hours to be able to utilize a sleep test that they need to do from a health perspective. So it's after hours, it's across boundaries. Firms like Via Mobility and Easy Rides in Broomfield, they're finding ways to be able to coordinate with each other to be able to make those trips happen. And so what I'd say to the community out there is, if you look at, if your situation, just the one you mentioned just earlier with your friend, have difficulties getting up to Boulder, would be to contact the transit network and kind of the resources that are available. And there's a lot of them, and everyone I've ever worked with is fantastic. So, for instance, again, Broomfield, I have a very close relationship with the Broomfield Easy Ride program. I mentioned Via Mobility at Boulder. I'm actually the chair of the Broomfield Local Coordination Council, the Broomfield LCC. Found online. You can find it on Broomfield's website. That's just a group that meets once a month to kind of basically talk transit and mobility and help individuals and communicate back and forth. Dr. Mack, which is the Denver Regional Mobility Access Council, Dr. Mack has a plethora of resources that can help do just that kind of stuff, to be able to help get around the greater Denver region and cross lines. They've got a Getting There guide and a Getting There app, which just has a bunch of information. Dr. Cog, the Denver Regional Council of Governments, plays a big role in mobility as well. So there is a lot of resources out there that can help people help people find more mobility. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of really creative people that are working really hard to be able to enhance individuals' mobility.
Well, Teague, thank you for all of this information. And I think for a little bit of hope, too, that things are changing, and for folks that have struggled with either geographic boundaries or, living a block too far from a fixed route to be able to get Access-a-Ride or something like that. Some of these challenges that we've faced over the years, the changes that are happening and as things are evolving towards a more customer-centric or rider-centric model, seems like it will be very hopeful for our listeners that things will be more accessible to them.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Kim. I mean, it's I agree. I think it is. Things do look optimistic. I know in this day and age, sometimes it's hard to see the sunshine, see the sunlight at the end of the tunnel, but it is there. I mean, again, I've been working in the transit industry for now 13 years, and I do think it's getting better. I think every year it's getting more rider centric. I think the barriers are being pulled down. I think services they're breaking services out of the silos. Another term I really like that I think is really catching on is kind of the concept of a family of services. A lot of transit agencies are saying, "Hey, we're not running a fixed route system and a paratransit system and this health and human service system. We have a family of services. The whole point is just get people where they need to go, and let's utilize all the resources we have. Let's share those resources, and let's make it happen." And I do feel that's becoming a reality. Again, technology is there, and as technology gets better, that does help. But I think, again, unfortunately it took a pandemic to make it happen, but I do think communities across the U.S. are looking internally kind of with fresh eyes and understanding that we can do better. We can address equity and accessibility when it comes to mobility. Mobility is such an important part of life. I think people really saw that and now really understand it and are taking the necessary steps to address it. So Kim, thank you again so much for allowing me to join your podcast. I appreciate it.
Great. And just to put a little additional plug in for the group in Broomfield, if somebody is interested, if they're living in that Broomfield area and are interested in participating in that group, where would they go for more information or to get involved?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It is called the Broomfield Local Coordinating Council, otherwise known as the Broomfield LCC. And the official website for it is, if you go to the broomfield.org and just search for LCC, you'll be able to find it. It doesn't have the greatest URL, but it's the Broomfield Local Coordination Council, Local Coordinating Council. And we meet, currently we're still meeting virtually, but we do meet virtually on the second Friday of every month from 9:30 to 11 a.m.
Great. Well, I would encourage anybody who's interested to be involved in that. Another thing that has come out of the pandemic, all of our virtual meetings, that can come in handy. I know we've enjoyed being able to get back in person with lots of folks, but having that technology is helpful in that way. So thank you so much, Teague. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in today and has listened today. As always, I encourage you to check out our other podcasts, Aftersight, Blindsight, and we will soon be rolling out in March, Blind Level Tech, our BLT podcast. So all things technology. So that maybe we'll be able to feature some of the new transit technologies as they come out. That would be very exciting. So thanks for joining us. If you want more information about Audio Information Network, you can go to our website at www.aincolorado.org. There you can find and access all of our podcasts. And if you're so inclined, you can make a donation to the nonprofit as well to keep all these programs free for everyone. Thanks again.